Have you ever watched your grandmother rinse out a used piece of wax paper, dry it flat on the dish towel rack, fold it back like it was fine linen, and wondered, truly wondered, if she had completely lost her mind? Have you ever seen her pull a jar of yellowed bacon grease from under the stove, sniff it, nod at it like it was an old friend, and use it to fry the morning eggs? Have you ever noticed her peeling potatoes over a separate bowl? Not the trash, never the trash, because those peels, those ugly brown peels, were worth more to her than a dollar bill. I used to watch her from the kitchen doorway when I was very young, before I understood anything at all about the world. I used to think she was strange, old-fashioned, maybe a little sad. I had no idea she was the wisest woman I would ever know. I am 75 years old. My name is Ruth, and I am here to tell you that the single most powerful financial secret I have ever discovered in my entire life was not in a bank, not in a stock market, not in any investment I ever made. It was written in a grease-stained, coffee-ringed spiral notebook that belonged to my grandmother, Mabel Ostrander, who was born in 1908 in rural Ohio and who survived the Great Depression, 2 world wars, and 40 years of stretching every single penny until it screamed. That notebook sits on my kitchen counter right now, beside a dented tin that once held Morton's salt and now holds her collection of saved buttons, rubber bands wound carefully together, and 3 large needles threaded with different colors of mending thread. Always ready, always waiting. Today, I am going to open that notebook, and I am going to show you how your trash can is full of money you are throwing away every single week without even knowing it. Stay with me. Every word of this matters. I grew up in Indiana, outside of a small town that you would never find on any map worth reading. My grandmother Mabel lived 3 houses down from us on the same gravel road, and from the time I could walk without falling, I was in her kitchen every morning before school. The smell of that kitchen is still the most comforting thing I have ever known. Wood smoke, and something always simmering, and that particular mineral smell of cast iron that has never been washed with soap a day in its life. Mabel cooked everything on a wood-burning stove until 1962. Not because she had to, because she wanted to. She was born into a farming family that owned very little and wasted absolutely nothing. Her own mother had taught her that every object, every scrap, every broken thing had a second life waiting inside it. You just had to be patient and clever enough to find it. But it was the Depression that truly made Mabel into the woman she became. She told me once, only once, about the winter of 1933. Her father had lost his factory work in October when the plant in their county shut down without warning. By December there was no money for food beyond what they could pull from the root cellar and the few dried goods her mother had put up in the fall. They were 5 children. They had a quarter of a side of salt pork, a bushel of dried beans, a sack of cornmeal, some withered carrots and turnips, and whatever her mother could stretch, scrape, salvage, and transform. Mabel told me she remembered her mother standing at the kitchen sink in the gray winter light, washing and drying each piece of wax paper from the store-bought crackers they had bought in November. She would lay the pieces flat, smooth out the wrinkles with the palm of her hand, stack them carefully, and put them back in the drawer. For wrapping sandwiches again, for lining a baking pan, for covering a bowl of rising dough. That image, her mother's hands smoothing that wax paper in the dim light, is something Mabel never forgot. She wrote it down in her notebook. I can see her handwriting right now, small and precise, pressed hard into the paper. Never throw away wax paper. Wash it. It has another use. That is how Mabel lived her entire life, and that is how she taught me to live mine. In those Depression winters, Nothing that came from the kitchen went to waste. Every vegetable peel was saved: potato skins, onion skins, carrot scrapings, celery ends. Mabel kept a pot on the back of the stove that she called the stock pot, and everything went in. Every morning those peels and scraps would simmer low and slow for hours with a pinch of salt and a bay leaf she grew herself in a pot on the window ledge. By evening she had a rich, golden broth that cost her nothing at all, not a single cent, and that broth was the base for everything. The soup that fed 5 children, the gravy that made the thin slice of salt pork stretch across 3 days, the liquid she used to cook the dried beans until they were thick and creamy and filling. I do this every single week. Right now in my kitchen in Indianapolis, there is a large glass jar in my refrigerator labeled Peels and Ends, where I put every scrap of vegetable that comes off my cutting board. When the jar is full, I make broth. It takes 20 minutes of my time and costs me nothing. Last month I counted. I made 4 full quarts of broth from scraps that any normal American household would have thrown directly into the garbage. 4 quarts! Do you know what 4 quarts of good broth costs at the grocery store right now? Go look. Then come back and tell me that Mabel was strange. She saved her bacon grease. This is the one that gets the most horrified looks from people my grandchildren's age. They act as though keeping a jar of rendered fat on the counter is some kind of public health emergency. Mabel kept a tin can, a coffee can, a Maxwell House can, with the lid set back on loose, right beside her stove. Every time she fried bacon, every time she cooked any kind of pork, she poured the hot grease carefully into that can through a little strainer she kept hanging on a nail. The grease lasted for months. She used it to fry eggs with a flavor that no modern cooking oil can come close to matching. She used it to grease her cast iron pans. She used it, and this is the part that I still do myself, to condition her leather shoes and boots in the fall. A small amount worked into leather with a soft rag, left to absorb overnight, keeps leather soft and waterproof through an entire winter. I have boots that are 30 years old because of this one trick that cost me nothing. Her mending was another thing altogether. Mabel never, and I mean this with absolute precision, never threw away a garment until it had been worn down to the point where it could not be mended one more time. And even then, it became something else. Old flannel shirts became quilt squares. Old cotton house dresses became dust rags, cut into squares with pinking shears, hemmed carefully, washed and reused for years. Old wool coats, when they finally gave out beyond mending, were cut into strips and braided into thick, warm rugs that she put in front of the kitchen door in the wood stove. Nothing left her house as garbage that still had any use at all left in it. I have a quilt on my bed right now, I am not exaggerating, that contains fabric from 6 different decades. There is a piece of a dress my mother wore in 1952. There is flannel from my father's old work shirts from the 70s. There is corduroy from my own coat that wore through at the elbows in 1988. Mabel began that quilt. I have been adding to it my entire adult life. It is the warmest, most beautiful, most valuable thing I own. It cost almost nothing to make. She saved her eggshells too. She had chickens, but even later in her life, when she bought eggs from the store, she never threw the shells away. She would dry them on the windowsill, crush them fine with the back of a spoon, and use them 2 ways. In the garden, her vegetable garden that fed her through every season, she worked the crushed shells into the soil around her tomatoes and peppers to give them calcium and to keep the slugs and pill bugs from eating the roots. And in the kitchen, she used the dried, finely crushed shells as a mild abrasive cleaner for her pots and her sink. Not a thing about that egg was wasted. The white and yolk went to food. The shell went to the garden and the cleaning. Every single part. Coffee grounds were the same. In a house that drank coffee every morning without exception, there were always grounds. Mabel put them directly into her garden beds in the spring. Nitrogen and acid both, perfect for her blueberry bushes. She put them in a small dish at the back of the refrigerator to absorb odors. She used them, wet, to scrub her cast iron pan after cooking fish, to get the smell out without using soap. And she wrote in her notebook, I can quote this exactly, "Used coffee grounds in the bottom of an ashtray, slightly damp, keep cigarette smoke from spreading through the room." My grandmother was a practical woman. Now I want to stop for just a moment and speak to you directly, because I think some of you watching this right now are smiling in recognition, and some of you are feeling something you might not have expected to feel. A kind of quiet shame, maybe, or a longing. Because you know, somewhere in the back of your mind, you know that you are throwing away real money every single week. My own grandchildren used to watch me wash out my Ziploc bags and hang them on the little drying rack I keep over the sink, and they would laugh. They thought it was funny. They thought it was a quirk, until one of them, my granddaughter Claire, sat down with me one afternoon and actually added up what she was spending on single-use items that she was throwing away. Zip bags, paper towels, disposable containers, plastic wrap, those little pods for the coffee maker. She looked at the number and she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Grandma, can I see that notebook?" That is exactly what I have been waiting for. Because Mabel did not write down those tricks just to save pennies. She wrote them down to preserve a way of seeing the world, a way of looking at every object and asking not, "Is this done?" but, "What else can this do?" She wrote down how to respect the things you have, how to extract their full and complete value before letting them go, so that you never, ever go without. I have spent the last 2 years gathering the most practical, immediately useful, zero-waste tricks and survival recipes from her notebook. The ones that still work in a modern kitchen, in a modern home, right now today. And I have put them together into a small digital book that I want you to have. I have left a copy of it in the pinned comment right below this video. Go down there and get it. It is Mabel's gift to you. It is free. It is practical. It will turn your trash into treasure starting today. Go get it. And when you come back, let me tell you what she taught me to do with leftover pickle brine, because that one changed my life. In the years after the Depression, when things gradually improved and money came a little more easily, Mabel did not change. Not one bit. This confused some people. Her neighbors, as the 50s became comfortable and then prosperous, began buying things. New appliances, new furniture, new clothes every season. Mabel watched all of this with a polite and private skepticism. She bought what she needed. She replaced what had truly worn out. She continued to save her peels and her grease and her eggshells and her rubber bands and her buttons. She had a jar by the back door where she put every rubber band that came into the house, from the newspaper, from vegetables at the grocery store, from any package. She had a button tin, the very tin that now sits on my counter, where she kept every button cut from a garment before it was repurposed into rags. When a shirt button fell off and was lost, there was always another to replace it. When elastic gave out in a waistband, there was always a rubber band strong enough to thread through temporarily. Nothing was bought new that did not absolutely have to be bought new. Her meals in those years were what I think of now as the greatest food I have ever eaten in my life. She made what she called garbage soup at least once a week, and that name was her joke, her little private joke, because there was nothing like garbage about it. Everything that had accumulated in the vegetable bin through the week, every slightly soft carrot, every half onion, every bunch of wilted parsley, the dark green tops of leeks, the outer leaves of cabbage, all of it went into the pot with the broth she had made from peels, and it became a soup that was different every single week and absolutely perfect every single time. She added dried beans or barley when she had them. She added a spoonful of the bacon grease for richness. She added the dark, slightly stale heel of the bread loaf, torn in pieces, which thickened the broth and tasted like it had always been meant to be there. I make that soup. My daughter makes it now. She called me last winter and said, "Mom, I made Mabel's soup and it was the best thing I've eaten in months." I cried. I am not ashamed to tell you that, because that soup is not just a recipe, it is a philosophy. It is the physical proof that abundance is not about having more. It is about seeing more in what you already have. She made fried rice from leftover rice. She made bread pudding from stale bread. She made pot pie from the last bits of a roast chicken, the scraps, the dark meat, the gristle cooked off the bones and added to the broth from those very same bones. Nothing was wasted, ever. The pickle brine was one that amazed me when she first explained it. When a jar of pickles was finished, most people threw the brine away. Mabel poured it into a smaller jar and kept it. She used it to quick pickle fresh cucumbers, sliced thin, overnight in the refrigerator. Another batch of pickles for nearly free. She used it in potato salad instead of vinegar. She used it as a brine for chicken before frying it, which made the most tender, flavorful fried chicken I have ever tasted in my life. She used a spoonful in salad dressing. She drank a small glass of it after yard work in the summer because she knew, before anyone used the word electrolytes, that it replaced what the heat took out of you.